Welcome back, reefers! This is the first video in a very important series that we're doing on how and why to do tank transfer method with your fish. There's a lot of information out there about this, but it seems to be everywhere in little bits and pieces. It takes a long time and a lot of research to find all the little bits of important information. My goal with this series is to provide a comprehensive guide, not taking anything for granted, and provide a complete step-by-step implementation guide. To do this, we'll separate the information into 3 different videos. The first video in the series will cover why this method is important to have in your reefing toolkit, and why it's so effective at treating the disease known as marine ick, white spot, or cryptocarrion. The second video will cover exactly how and when to do the transfer series, and the third video will include all the tips, tricks, and special cases that may arise. If you already have sick fish and need to jump straight into the how-to guide, skip this video and go straight to part 2 of this series. The sooner you get moving, the better chance your fish will have of surviving. Anyone in the saltwater hobby that keeps fish in their tank should be aware of the powerful disease prevention and treatment option called tank transfer method. When done properly, this can be a guaranteed cure for marine ick, and it doesn't require any medication at all. Many medications, including copper, can be very detrimental to your fish's health, and they can often cause a fish's appetite to be suppressed, which is the last thing you want for a fish that is already sick or trying to acclimate to a new environment. Tank transfers are almost so ridiculously simple it seems too good to be true, but it works. It is important to know that this process does not cure any other diseases, but this particular disease seems to be so prevalent in the saltwater hobby that it's always worthwhile to be rid of it in your display tank. This process can be done on new incoming fish before they even enter a quarantine tank, and it will also work on fish that you already own. If your fish are already in a weakened state and showing signs of ick, you may not have much time to try to reverse the damage. Removing them from the tank they are in as soon as safely possible is very important. I personally like to use this on any incoming fish we purchase because it serves 2 purposes. First, because it allows me to keep ick from entering my tank, and second, because it gives me at least a 13-day observation period with the fish before putting them in our quarantine tank. In the third video of this series, I'll talk about some advanced topics that include treatments you can do while performing tank transfers to increase quarantine process efficiency. The disease we are trying to prevent from reaching our reef tanks with tank transfer goes by a few names. It's known as ick, marine ick, white spot, or cryptocarrion. It cures ick 100% of the time, even when there are no visible symptoms. When you do spot it, it appears as little white dots that look like sugar or salt. Most often you'll see them first in the fins and then on the body. It can be hard to spot on a very light-colored fish. It's possible, if you're paying close attention, to notice it when there are only 1 or 2 spots on your fish. There is another disease called marine velvet that can look very similar initially, but will multiply much faster on your fish and will kill them much faster. There are other symptoms of ick as well. Fish may rub up against rocks or sand. They may wash themselves in bubbles from an air stone. Fish may be breathing rapidly. They may be lethargic, hiding, or not eating well. The disease can seem to come and go. One day you may see a couple of spots on a fish, and the next day they may be gone and you'll think it was all in your head. This is part of the disease life cycle, and each time it appears on your fish it will be worse than the last time you saw it. Sometimes it moves very quickly, and your fish won't have long to live if you delay in treatment. The reason you'll see it come and go is because of how the parasite reproduces. Therons are in the water column searching for a fish to attach to. Ick medicines only work to kill the parasite when it's in this specific stage of development. Trophonts are when the parasite is now attached to a fish, and it is burrowing into its skin and doing damage to your fish. This is when you'll see the white dots appear, not as the actual parasite itself, but the places where it has attached itself to the skin. Protomonts exist after feeding up to 9 days. The parasite will drop off the fish and search for something hard to attach to in the tank. It only takes a few hours for the parasite to find a landing place on your rock, sand, heater, power head, glass, PVC, anything hard. Tomonts, once they're attached to something hard, will begin to reproduce. Hundreds of new parasites can be created during this time, taking as little as a couple of days or as long as 72 days. That's almost 3 months. Once the parasite is released into the water column again, your fish are once again on the menu. So why does tank transfer method work so well? Well, it works precisely because we do know how this life cycle occurs. The idea with tank transfer is to move your fish from the environment it's in before the parasite has a chance to complete its life cycle. Each time the fish moves to a new tank, more and more of the parasite is left behind, and after a minimum of 5 transfers, it is essentially guaranteed to be gone. Now, that's a pretty strong statement, and even I was doubtful, so analyst that I am, I had to put it to the test. I ended up playing with a matrix where I identified the maximum and minimum time frames. So, how did you get ick in the first place? As you can tell from what we just discussed, it can be had from just about anywhere. You can buy a healthy fish from a local store, but there may be therons in the water in the bag. You may buy a fish that looks healthy but is already infected and you can't see it yet. You could buy live rock, a coral, a bunch of snails and crabs. Tomons could be attached to any of them. Anything that you buy wet, including macroalgae, could come with this invisible parasite. With all of these sources, it may seem like it's impossible to avoid getting ick in your tank, but that isn't true. Because we know how it reproduces, we can take steps to make sure it doesn't survive the looking for a host phase of the life cycle. If you properly quarantine incoming corals, algae, and inverts in a tank that has no fish in it, the disease has nothing to infect and will die. The next video in this series will walk you through that process step by step. There are some other forms of treatment for ick, but by most standards, none of them are as successful as doing a tank transfer series. There are some medications available that claim to kill ick, including copper. There are a few things to know about this path. The medication can be detrimental to your fish's health and appetite. It can be difficult to measure and keep the proper levels, and it also requires careful planning and monitoring, particularly keeping ammonia in check, because many medications cannot be put directly in a reef tank and will require a separate hospital tank setup. In our own fish tank, we actually did copper treat the whole tank last year due to accidental cross-contamination with a quarantine tank, because we didn't have anything else big enough to hold the fish we owned. For months we used copper power and struggled to kill the ick, but each time we lowered the copper level, the ick would return. In the end, we had to do a tank transfer with them all in enormous bins, and wished that we had just started with that instead of waiting. The tank was a total mess during that time, and it was very disheartening. If the fish had died, I'm sure I would have quit the hobby, but we were lucky in that everyone in the display tank survived, because the very night that we made the mistake, we assumed the worst and started treatment immediately. The only thing that cured it, though, in the end, was tank transfer. Hypo salinity is another option, and the idea here is that by lowering the salinity, you reduce the likelihood that the parasite can survive. This is not entirely reliable because sometimes they do survive, and whenever you mess with the salinity that your fish are in, you're risking their health. Raising the salinity back up to proper levels has to be done very carefully. And natural immunity. We tried this initially because experienced hobbyists convinced me that they never quarantine anything. Their fish are just healthy and never stressed, so they don't fall victim to disease. What they don't mention is that lots of fish will die before you find ones that can survive constantly having ick in your tank. I don't like killing fish, and I don't believe that any life is disposable, so this is just not an option for me. If you've learned anything from this video, I hope you'll recognize that prevention is the best medicine. If you perform a tank transfer series on all incoming fish and quarantine anything else that's wet for 72 days in a fishless tank, you will never have ick in your tank unless you somehow cross-contaminate the system with something that does have ick. This is about as close to 100% guarantee that you can get in this hobby. If aquarium heaters were as reliable as this prevention method, I'd be a happy camper. Ick is completely preventable in your tank. Now you know what it is, how to spot it, and how to beat it. The next video will show you exactly what you need to do. Are you ready? I ended up playing with a matrix where I identified the maximum and minimum time frames for each part of the life cycle and began testing out variants of this timeline. First, I created a timeline where the parasite followed absolutely all of the fastest data points, finding a host immediately, feeding for 3 days, finding a landing spot in 2 hours, and breeding for 3 days. I then did the longest timeline using all of the max values. After that, I created 5 different variations with random start points using averages. In each line, I was looking for a point where the parasite would be breeding, which is truly the most reliable point of removal because you kill them with bleach or vinegar. No matter when I started my timeline or what variables I used, there was always a tank transfer that aligned with that part of the life cycle, for all of them. Obviously, there are way too many permutations of this for me to do manually, but the more I played with it, the more I was convinced. There might be that chance in 1,000 or 1,000,000 where the parasite could survive, but I will never stumble across it throwing darts at the wall like this. It appears that the only way you can fail in this process is by cross-contamination and/or by not drying the equipment from each tank thoroughly between transfers.